My name is Amelia, and I am 28 years old. The slice of birthday cake turned to ash in my mouth as my cousin Chloe's voice, sharp and saccharine, cut through the chatter of the party. I just think it's amazing, she said, raising her champagne flute in a toast that was really a dagger aimed at my heart. To my parents, who taught me that hard work is everything. It's just so sad when you see other people, even family, who never learned that lesson. Some people would rather be a freeloader their whole life than stand on their own 2 feet. Every head in the garden turned towards me. The humiliation was a physical force, hot and suffocating, wrapping around my throat. I saw the pity in some eyes, the smug agreement in others. I could feel my own hands begin to shake, not with weakness, but with a rage so profound it threatened to swallow the sky. This was Chloe's signature move, a public execution disguised as a toast. For years, she had painted me as the family charity case, the poor, orphaned artist living off handouts. It was a narrative built on half-truths and jealousy. My parents were gone, yes, and my aunt and uncle, her parents, had been my saviors, my true north. But Chloe saw their love for me not as compassion, but as a resource I was stealing from her. She couldn't stand that they respected my quiet hustle, my slow-burn career as a graphic designer, which I'd built from nothing in the small apartment. My grandmother left me, in her world of corporate ladders and trust fund allowances. My independence was invisible, so she simply pretended it didn't exist. "I can't believe you would do this to me," I finally said, my voice dangerously low as I stood up, the party's cheerful music suddenly feeling like a funeral dirge. Here, at Uncle Ben's birthday party, Chloe just shrugged, a perfect picture of feigned innocence. "I'm just speaking the truth, Amelia. Everyone knows Mum and Dad have been paying your bills for years. It's nothing to be ashamed of, I guess. It's just ... a fact." The lie was so blatant, so perfectly crafted to inflict maximum damage, that it took my breath away. She knew I paid my own way. She knew the apartment was my only inheritance. She was counting on the fact that I was too polite, too grateful to my aunt and uncle, to ever cause a scene and correct her. But something inside me broke at that moment. The years of biting my tongue, of swallowing her insults to keep the peace, were over. I looked past her, at the beautiful house I had practically grown up in, the sprawling lawn, the rose bushes my Aunt Sarah treasured. Chloe saw it all as her birthright, the stage for her perfect, entitled life. She had no idea how close she was to losing it all. She had no idea that while she was busy calling me a freeloader, I was the only thing standing between this home and a foreclosure notice. I gave her a look, a cold, empty promise of a reckoning she couldn't possibly comprehend. "You have no idea what you've done," I whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving her to bask in her cruel, temporary victory. The war was just beginning. Walking away from that party was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every part of me wanted to turn around, to scream the truth in Chloe's smug face for everyone to hear, but I couldn't. Not because I was scared of her, but because I was terrified of hurting her parents. My Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben saved my life after I lost my own parents. They took in a broken teenage girl and gave me a home, a family. They celebrated my small victories and cushioned my falls for their sake. I had absorbed Chloe's toxic jealousy for years, always believing that keeping the peace was the most important thing. But as I drove home, her words echoing in my ears, I realized that peace was a luxury we no longer had. The storm was already here. The truth is, things had felt wrong for months. My uncle, usually the life of the party, had grown quiet and withdrawn. My aunt's smile never seemed to reach her eyes anymore. They started making excuses to miss our weekly dinners, blaming it on being tired or busy. I knew them, They were proud people, the kind who would rather suffer in silence than ever admit they were struggling. They would never, ever ask for help, especially not from me, the one they had always helped. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called my best friend Liam. He's not some high-powered lawyer, just a hard-working paralegal who understands how the world really works behind the scenes. I asked him if he could discreetly look into my uncle's construction company, just to see if there were any public filings or legal issues I should know about. A few days later, Liam called me back, his voice flat and heavy. The news he delivered was a physical blow. He told me it wasn't just the business. It was the house. Uncle Ben's company had folded months ago after a bad deal, and he had taken out a huge high-risk loan against the house to try and save it. He had defaulted on the payments, and the bank was now moving to seize the property. A notice of foreclosure auction was scheduled to be posted in less than a month. The home where I spent my first Christmas without my mum, the backyard where Uncle Ben taught me how to ride a bike, it was all about to be sold off to the highest bidder. My family was about to become homeless, and they had no idea I knew. My first instinct was to call Chloe. As awful as she was, these were her parents too. Surely she would want to help. I dialed her number, my heart pounding with a desperate, misplaced hope. "Chloe, we need to talk," I said, the second she answered. "It's an emergency. It's about your parents and the house." Her response was instant and colder than ice. "Oh God, Amelia, what is it now? Did the boiler break in your little charity apartment?" she sneered. "Whatever it is, I'm busy. My parents are fine. Stop being so dramatic." She hung up before I could say another word, and in that moment, in that chilling, dismissive click, I understood. Her lack of surprise wasn't just callousness, it was knowledge. She already knew. That phone call with Chloe changed everything. The casual way she dismissed my panic, the boredom in her voice when I mentioned an emergency about her own parents, it wasn't just the cruelty of a spoiled brat. It was the calm confidence of someone who was already in on the secret. The blood in my veins turned to ice. She knew. I didn't know how or why, but I knew with absolute certainty that she was aware her parents were about to lose their home, and she simply didn't care. That meant my enemy wasn't just the bank or a looming deadline. It was my own cousin, operating from inside the family, with a hidden agenda I couldn't begin to understand. Going to my aunt and uncle was out of the question. Telling them the truth would drown them in shame, and their pride would never let them accept my help. Going to Chloe was like asking the arsonist to help you put out the fire. I was completely and utterly on my own. I met Liam for coffee the next morning, my mind a mess of fear and anger. He laid out the grim reality. The foreclosure auction was public. Vulture-like developers would be there, ready to snatch up the property for pennies on the dollar, bulldoze the house, and destroy every memory inside it. He said my only chance to save it was to become a vulture myself, but a secret one. He suggested I could form an anonymous company, a simple LLC, to bid on the house. It would hide my identity, but it created a new, terrifying problem. An LLC needed to be funded, and to win at auction, it needed enough money to beat the developers. We're not talking about a small loan. We're talking about a life-changing amount of cash that I absolutely did not have. My career was finally stable. But I was a graphic designer, not a corporate CEO. The weight of that number crushed me. For a moment, I felt completely hopeless, like I was trying to stop a tidal wave with my bare hands. Chloe had called me a freeloader, a nobody, and in that moment, faced with the mountain of money I needed to save her parents, I felt like she was right. I had nothing. How could I possibly do this? That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment and made a decision. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was the only move I had left. I pulled out the small velvet box that held my grandmother's jewelry, the last physical pieces I had of her. I looked at my online bank account, at the savings I had painstakingly built over 5 years, dreaming of one day buying a small studio of my own. It was my entire future, and I knew I had to burn it all down for their past. After adding it all up, it still wasn't nearly enough. So I made another call, this time to a name Liam gave me with a serious warning, a hard money lender, a man who gave out high interest, short-term loans to people with no other options. As I explained my situation, I knew I was making a deal with the devil, trading my financial future for a lottery ticket. The cliff wasn't just approaching anymore. I was running right off of it. The week leading up to the auction was the longest of my life. The loan came through, but it felt less like a lifeline and more like an anchor, dragging me down into a dark financial ocean I might never escape from. My life savings were gone. My grandmother's jewelry was sold, and now I was in debt to a man who would break my legs for a late payment. Liam helped me find a Catrate lawyer to handle the LLC and the bidding, a gruff older man who seemed more interested in his fee than my family's drama. When he called to tell me the bid was successful, that the company, my company now, owned the house, I didn't feel relief. All I felt was the cold, heavy dread of what came next. The plan was in motion, and now the real pain had to begin. The blow I was waiting for landed 2 days later. My phone rang, and it was my Aunt Sarah, her voice so broken I could barely understand her. "Amelia," she sobbed, "they sold it. They sold the house." She told me a letter had arrived from a legal firm, a cold, formal notice from an investment company I'd never heard of, informing them that they were the new owners and my aunt and uncle had 30 days to vacate their premises. 30 days to leave the home they had built for over 40 years. Listening to her cry, knowing I was the source of that pain, that I was the faceless company on that letterhead, was a form of torture. I was their secret savior, but in that moment, I was just another one of the bad guys. As if that wasn't enough. Chloe twisted the knife. She posted a photo of her and her parents from years ago, a happy, sunny memory. The caption dripped with fake sadness, crafted for public sympathy. "So heartbroken for my family," she wrote. "Sometimes life is just so cruel and unfair. It's horrible to feel so helpless." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She wasn't helpless. She was an accomplice. She was using her parents' tragedy she knew about and did nothing to stop as a prop to make herself look like a loving daughter on social media. She was turning their lowest moment into a performance, and I was her intended audience. That was it for me. The careful plan, the secrecy, it all went out the window. I couldn't take it anymore. The guilt from my aunt's call and the sheer rage from Chloe's post was a toxic combination. I had to tell them the truth, no matter the consequences. I grabbed my keys, ready to drive to their house and confess everything, to tell them it was me, that they were safe, that it was all a horribly misguided plan to protect them. As I ran out the door, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Aunt Sarah, in all caps. "Amelia, call me now. It's your uncle. He collapsed. I think it's his heart. We're on our way to the hospital." My world stopped. The plan hadn't just hurt them. It might have just killed him. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and pure terror. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head, each one ending with me being the cause of my uncle's death. My grand, secret plan to save them felt like the most selfish, arrogant thing I had ever done. I had played with their lives without their permission, and now the consequences were staring me in the face from a hospital gurney. I wasn't their savior, I was their destroyer. By the time I burst into the cardiac unit waiting room, I was ready to fall on my knees and confess to everything, to beg for a forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. Aunt Sarah was huddled on a plastic chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. And next to her, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes, was Chloe. The moment she saw me, her fake grief vanished, replaced by a familiar, venomous glare. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she hissed, her voice low enough so only her mother and I could hear. "A little late, don't you think? Dad is lying in that room, fighting for his life because of the stress of losing everything, and you were nowhere. Too busy with your little art projects to care about the people who raised you." Before I could even respond, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Miss Collier." We all turned. It was the lawyer, the gruff man I'd hired, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. I had called him from the car, a panicked, sobbing mess, telling him the plan was over, that my uncle was in the hospital. He had simply said, "Don't say a word to anyone until I get there." Now he stood before us, holding a leather briefcase. Chloe scoffed. "Who are you?" His eyes locked onto her. "I'm the attorney representing the investment firm that purchased your parents' home," he said. But then he looked at me, "And I am also Amelia's personal counsel." The room went silent. Chloe's face was a mask of confusion, but a flicker of fear appeared in her eyes. "My client," the lawyer continued, "was prepared to give the house back. But in our due diligence, we uncovered some troubling information about why the house went into foreclosure in the first place." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of an email. He held it out, not for everyone, but angled so only Chloe could see it clearly. I was standing just behind her, and I saw it too. It was from her, sent to my uncle's ex-business partner, Stan. The subject line read, "Keeping Dad Calm." The email detailed a plan to have her father sign papers he wouldn't understand. The lawyer's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "The district attorney is very interested in the criminal fraud that Stan Gable committed against your father. They are even more interested in his co-conspirator." Aunt Sarah slowly looked from the paper to her daughter's terrified, ghostly white face. The air crackled. The freeloader wasn't the villain of this story after all. The real villain had been sitting here all along, pretending to be a victim. The silence in that hospital hallway was louder than any scream. Chloe stared at the email in the lawyer's hand, her face completely vacant of its usual arrogance, leaving only a raw, primal fear. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My Aunt Sarah slowly rose to her feet, her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, now sharp and focused. She looked at her daughter, and I could see decades of unconditional love curdling into horrified disbelief. This was the moment the ground shifted. The moment when the truth became more powerful than any lie Chloe had ever told. The reckoning was no longer coming. It was here. Finally, Chloe found her voice, falling back on her old, useless tactics. "It's a lie. That's fake," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She did this. Amelia is jealous of me. She's trying to ruin my life and steal my inheritance." But her words were hollow, and for the first time, nobody was listening. My aunt took a step forward, her voice a terrifying whisper. "Your inheritance. Your father is in that room, connected to wires and tubes, because you were worried about your inheritance. You knew we were losing everything. You stood by and watched him work himself into a heart attack, and you said nothing." The questions hung in the air like poison, each one a conviction. The dam of my aunt's grief finally broke, replaced by a wave of pure, righteous fury. She slapped Chloe across the face. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sound, but a sharp, ugly crack that echoed in the quiet hall. It was the sound of a heartbreaking, of a mother's trust being permanently shattered. In that moment, I saw Chloe's fiancé, who had been standing awkwardly by the elevators, turn and walk away without a single word, vanishing from the life she had so carefully built. Her entire world was collapsing in on her, right here on the sterile linoleum floor. She had lost her parents' trust, her partner, and her reputation in the span of 5 minutes. Just then, a doctor stepped out of my uncle's room. "He's stable," he said calmly. "He's awake and asking for you, Mrs. Doc Collier." My aunt looked at me, her eyes swimming with 1,000 emotions: gratitude, shame, regret. She pulled me into a fierce hug, whispering thank you into my ear. Then she released me and turned to face her daughter, who was now a sobbing heap on the floor. Her voice was cold, stripped of all warmth. "You will wait right here," she commanded. "When I am done seeing your father, you and I will have a conversation, and then you will explain that email to the police." She turned and walked into the hospital room, leaving Chloe utterly and completely alone, her spectacular downfall just beginning. The final showdown didn't happen with yelling and screaming. It happened a week later, in the quiet, sunlit living room of the house I now legally owned. The air was thick with unspoken words. My Uncle Ben was home from the hospital, looking frail in his favorite armchair, a blanket draped over his lap. Aunt Sarah sat beside him, her expression a mask of hardened grief. I stood by the fireplace, the silent owner of a home I never wanted. And then there was Chloe, led into the room like a prisoner for sentencing. She was pale and stripped of all her designer armor, looking like a ghost haunting the scene of her own crime. My uncle spoke first, his voice weak but steady, carrying more weight than any shout ever could. He looked at his only daughter and asked the one word question that held everything. "Why?" Chloe finally broke. The tears were real this time, ugly and desperate. She confessed everything, not in a grand speech, but in a pathetic, broken whisper. "It was all because of me." She said she was jealous, not of my life, but of the look in their eyes when they talked about me. She saw pride in them for my resilience, for my quiet determination to make it on my own. She felt that everything she did, the expensive school, the corporate job, was just to meet their expectations, but that they truly admired me. She wanted to be the one they respected, the one in control, so she made a deal with the devil to bring her own father down, hoping she could be the one to save him and finally earn their respect. It was the most twisted, heartbreaking logic I had ever heard. She didn't want to destroy them. She wanted to own them, to be their hero, and her jealousy had corroded her soul until she couldn't tell the difference. My Aunt Sarah then delivered the final blow. She explained, in a cold, flat voice, that Stan had been arrested. He had confessed to everything to get a lighter sentence, and he had given the police a mountain of evidence against his co-conspirator, his own daughter. The district attorney was ready to charge Chloe with felony fraud. Her last hope, that her parents would sweep in and make it all go away like they always had, vanished from her eyes. That's when I spoke. My lawyer had told me that given the circumstances, my wishes would carry weight. I held all the power, but I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I told her the deal she would be offered: plead guilty to a lesser charge. No jail time, but a criminal record that would follow her forever. Years of probation and thousands of hours of community service, and the final consequence: this house would remain my property. Her parents would live here, safe and rent-free, for the rest of their lives. But she, Chloe, was no longer welcome. She had to leave. She had to learn what it was like to have nothing, to build something real, to stand on her own 2 feet. The freeloader was now her parents' protector, and the entitled daughter was being sent into exile with nothing but the mess she had made. It's funny how a storm can make you appreciate the quiet. A few months have passed, and the silence in this house is no longer heavy with secrets, but filled with a calm, peaceful light. I learned a hard lesson, that we look at other people's lives like a picture in a frame, thinking we see the whole story. We see someone's struggle and call it weakness. We see someone's silence and call it surrender. But we have no idea what kind of strength they are building when no one is watching, or what secret battles they are fighting just to get through the day. The truth is, the loudest person in the room is often the one with the most to hide. Chloe took the plea deal. The last I heard, she was living in a tiny apartment on the far side of town, working double shifts at a diner to make rent. Her fancy friends and fiancé disappeared the moment the money did. My aunt told me she calls sometimes. Some days, she is bitter and angry, still blaming the world for her problems. But other days, she just sounds tired, worn down by the simple, hard reality of a life she never had to live. Maybe one day, she understands that respect isn't something you can demand or inherit. It's something you have to earn, one honest day at a time. Her road to redemption, if she ever chooses to walk it, will be a long one. My Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben are healing. The betrayal left deep scars, but they are finding their way back to each other. My uncle started a small handyman business, fixing things for neighbors, finding purpose again in his own two hands. They live simply now, finding more joy in a quiet evening on the porch than they ever did in expensive things. And as for me, I finally understand what family means. It's not just about blood. It's about who shows up when the walls are caving. In the high-interest loan I took out is a heavy burden, a constant reminder of the risk I took. But every payment is worth it to know that my family is safe under this roof. So, here is the lesson. Before you decide you know someone's story, before you write them off, before you post that comment or share that piece of gossips, just for a second, remember that what you see is never the full picture. The person you look down on today could be carrying burdens you can't imagine. And they might just be the one holding the keys to the world you think you own tomorrow. Don't just be kind because it's the right thing to do. Be kind because you have no idea how much strength it takes for some people just to stand. Choose compassion over judgment, always.